Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Samantha wants Martin to listen to her perspective, a quiet yet pressing plea that echoes across the fragile bonds of a family already marked by loss, absence, and the weight of choices that can never be undone. This plea becomes the catalyst for a tangle of conflicts that stretch between generations, opening doors that some would rather keep locked while others desperately need to push open. It begins with the simmering awareness that Samantha and Tyrell, now on the cusp of adulthood, are standing at the edge of independence but still tethered to the unresolved shadows of their past. They have grown into voices of their own, but the voices are not always in harmony. Samantha carries a restlessness, the sense that there are corners of her life that Martin, Smitty, or even Tyrell cannot understand because they are not her, because they are not women, because there are some truths that need a mother's language to make sense. When she raises the subject of June, she does not do it with care but with the sharp urgency of someone who has been holding it back too long. She tells Tyrell she wants June nearby, at least enough to talk, to bridge a space that has always felt like a hole. Tyrell recoils, and the argument ignites. For Tyrell, June is not an abstract absence but a wound that has not healed. He remembers vividly the days of hunger, the nights of cold, the raw sensation of abandonment that pressed into his body while June chased her next high. The memory of her addiction is not distant, it is immediate, like the scar on skin that always aches when the weather turns. To him, bringing June back into their lives is inviting rot back into wood already splintering. He reminds Samantha of the promise they had once made: never again, never let her back in, never open the door she had slammed shut on them. He throws the memory of her betrayal in Samantha's face, not out of cruelty but out of fear. Fear that the cycle will spin again and they will be powerless to stop it. But Samantha's need is different. It is not naive longing, not a refusal to acknowledge June's failures. It is the recognition that there are gaps in her life that only a mother can fill. She does not want to discuss her body's changes with Martin or Smitty, does not want to turn to Tyrell for questions that feel private and tender. She does not want her milestones narrated by men who love her but cannot fully understand. She says this not in whispers but in frustrated bursts, telling Tyrell there are things she cannot and will not share with three men, no matter how much they care. This is not betrayal but assertion, the insistence that her needs must be seen and not dismissed under the shadow of June's past. The fight between them is bruising, not because of physical blows but because of the truths that come out, truths that cannot be easily retracted. Samantha accuses Tyrell of trying to decide her needs for her, of wanting to erase a mother she never fully had but still yearns for. Tyrell counters with memories of hunger and cold, the sound of doors locking behind them, the days they had to survive without comfort. It is a clash of memory against desire, of survival against longing, and neither can convince the other. The air between them grows thick with accusation, until finally Tyrell, with exhaustion that softens the sharpness of his tone, apologizes. He admits he was too harsh, that maybe Samantha deserves the choice to at least ask the question. Slowly, begrudgingly, he agrees that she can talk to Martin about June. This concession is not small. For Tyrell, it feels like opening a door just enough to let in a draft. But for Samantha, it is the beginning of possibility. When she brings it to Martin, her voice is steadier, framed not as a demand but as a plea to be understood. Martin listens in the deliberate way he has always listened, not rushing to judgment, weighing not only the request but the implications that ripple outward from it. Smitty, overhearing, reacts with sharp disapproval. He wants June kept far, wants no connection, no chance of relapse, no return to the old damage. His reaction is swift, like a door slammed shut in the middle of a storm. For Smitty, the past is not an open question, it is a verdict, and June has already been sentenced. He cannot bear the idea of exposing the children to the risk again. But Martin interrupts. He tells Smitty that, whether they like it or not, June is Samantha's mother, and motherhood cannot be erased by decree. He argues that there are some things only June can provide guidance on, however fractured her history may be. He points to Samantha's need for advice about her first menstrual cycle, a moment that, however natural, is deeply personal and formative. To deny her this chance is to deny her the dignity of choice. Martin says this not as a defense of June's past but as recognition of Samantha's present. Smitty bristles, but Martin is unyielding. He does not romanticize June, does not pretend she was ever reliable, but he knows that pretending she does not exist will only harden Samantha's resentment. He insists that the real responsibility is not to police Samantha's choices but to help her navigate them safely, even if that means letting her touch the flame with care. Tyrell, watching this exchange, feels torn. On one side, his fear; on the other, his loyalty to Samantha. He feels the old urge to shield her, to protect her from repeating the hurt they both endured. But he also hears Martin's reasoning and knows that to silence Samantha would be another kind of wound. He chooses silence, for now, a fragile truce. In the background of all this, Martin speaks to Smitty about what truly matters. He says they cannot keep clinging to old grudges at the expense of the present. The children are already scarred by absence, by silence, by the weight of history. What they need now is not more division but reconciliation. He tells Smitty that his role is not to prevent every conflict but to help Tyrell and Samantha find their own ways of facing their mother. He reminds Smitty that healing does not come from erasure but from facing the wounds together. For Smitty, this is difficult to hear. He has carried bitterness against June for years. Bitterness sharpened by the helplessness of watching two children endure pain he could not fully shield them from. To him, forgiveness feels like weakness, like rewriting history in favor of someone who did not earn it. But Martin's words press against the walls of his resistance. Martin suggests that maybe this is not about forgiving June but about giving Samantha the agency she craves. That maybe the true act of protection is not barring her path but walking beside her as she steps onto it. As the conversations unfold, the house feels both heavy and expectant. Samantha senses change, fragile and uncertain, but change nonetheless. Tyrell is quiet, watching his sister with the wary gaze of someone who has lived too long with responsibility, someone who knows that love and fear are often intertwined. Smitty is restless, pacing between anger and reluctant acceptance, trying to decide whether to stand firm or give ground. Martin, meanwhile, becomes the quiet fulcrum on which it all balances, determined not to impose his will but to create space for theirs. The story deepens because it is not simply about whether June returns or not. It is about what she represents, the mother who failed them, the woman who abandoned them, the figure whose absence shaped their lives as much as her presence once did. For Samantha, she is the missing voice she still wants. For Tyrell, she is the ghost that haunts every moment of strength he had to build for himself. For Martin and Smitty, she is the test of what it means to love children who are not theirs yet feel entirely their own. Each conversation, each conflict, stretches these bonds thinner but also reveals their strength. It shows how love can be both protective and suffocating, how forgiveness can feel like betrayal, how the longing for a mother can persist even when reason says it should not. And in the middle of it all, Samantha stands with her need unshaken, willing to risk conflict, willing to risk disappointment, because to her the silence is worse than the risk of pain. Samantha's determination sharpens into action, and the fragile truce inside the house begins to shift under the weight of her persistence. She approaches Martin again, this time with less pleading and more certainty. Her tone carries the quiet conviction of someone who has thought through the consequences and chosen to move forward anyway. She tells him she needs to see June, not as a replacement for what she has lost but as a necessary piece of who she is becoming. Martin listens, as he always does, his eyes reflecting both the risk and the necessity. He knows this decision will reshape the balance among them, but he also knows denying her will fracture trust beyond repair. Tyrell watches from the corner, arms crossed, his silence louder than words. He has already apologized once for trying to silence his sister, but that doesn't mean his fears have disappeared. He remembers every holiday they endured without June's care, every time survival felt like luck instead of love. He wants to believe Samantha can face her mother and come away unscathed, but his instincts tell him otherwise. The conflict inside him is raw: protect his sister from the possibility of heartbreak or stand aside and risk watching her fall. Smitty, however, cannot hide his disapproval. He warns Martin that letting June back in will undo everything they've built, that it will open doors they fought hard to close. His voice trembles with anger not only at June but at the idea of losing control over the fragile piece of their family. He doesn't see June as a woman who deserves redemption. He sees her as the embodiment of every danger they have worked to keep away. To him, even a single meeting could unravel Samantha's stability and Tyrell's hard-won strength. Martin responds with a quiet steadiness that frustrates Smitty. He insists this is not about forgiving June or trusting her blindly. It is about respecting Samantha's voice and giving her the dignity of choice. He tells Smitty that clinging to old anger will not protect the children forever. Instead, it risks teaching them that their lives can only be shaped by fear. He asks Smitty to see this not as surrender but as support, not as weakness but as a form of strength. Samantha senses the battle between the two men but keeps her focus. She refuses to let their arguments drown out what she feels. For her, meeting June is not about expecting perfection or pretending the past never happened. It is about finding the missing pieces of her own story, the things she cannot ask of men no matter how much they love her. It is about having someone who can speak to her in the language of women, in the language of shared experience, about moments that mark her growing body and her place in the world. Tyrell eventually speaks, his voice strained but honest. He tells Samantha that if she must see June, he will not stop her, but he cannot bring himself to stand in the room when it happens. He admits he does not have the strength to look into their mother's eyes and pretend the memories don't matter. He says this with no malice, only exhaustion, as if speaking it aloud releases a burden he has carried too long. His withdrawal is painful for Samantha, but she also understands. She knows his love for her is the reason he cannot face June, the reason his wounds run deeper than words can heal. The day of the meeting arrives quietly, with no ceremony. Martin arranges it in a way that is cautious, careful, structured to minimize risk. He makes sure Samantha knows she can leave at any moment, that she owes nothing beyond what she is willing to give. Smitty, though unconvinced, agrees not to interfere, though his disapproval lingers like a storm cloud at the edge of the sky. Tyrell stays behind, pacing the floor, his body tense with unspoken worry. When Samantha sees June, the first thing she notices is the contrast between memory and reality. June is thinner, her face lined with years of struggle, her eyes both familiar and foreign. There is a fragility to her, but also a spark, a suggestion that beneath the wreckage of addiction remains a woman who once dreamed of being a mother. Samantha feels a rush of emotions, anger for the abandonment, sadness for what could have been, curiosity about what remains. The conversation begins awkwardly. June tries to speak lightly, as if they can bridge years of distance with small talk, but Samantha does not allow it. She confronts her directly, demanding to know why she left, why hunger and cold had been her children's companions while June disappeared into her own darkness. June listens, shoulders hunched, her silence weighted with guilt. She admits the truth plainly, that she was weak, that the addiction was stronger than her love, that she hated herself for it then and hates herself for it now. She does not beg forgiveness but offers honesty, as raw and flawed as it is. Samantha does not forgive her, not yet, but she also does not walk away. She presses on, asking the questions she had saved for this moment: how to manage the changes in her body, how to understand the milestones she faces, how to navigate a womanhood she cannot explain to Martin, Smitty, or even Tyrell. June answers carefully, her voice trembling but steady enough to offer what guidance she can. For the first time in years, Samantha feels like she is hearing a piece of the language she had missed. It does not erase the pain, but it gives her something she can hold. Back at the house, Tyrell waits with restless energy. When Samantha returns, he searches her face for signs of hurt, for the fracture he fears. Instead, he sees complexity, not joy, not relief, but something quieter. She is not healed, but she is not destroyed either. She tells him she got what she needed, that the answers may not fix everything but they gave her strength. Tyrell struggles to accept this, but he also sees that her decision has not broken her. Slowly, he realizes his fear, though justified, cannot define her choices. Smitty remains cautious, his distrust of June unshaken. He warns Samantha not to confuse one conversation with redemption. But Martin urges him to see the progress, however small. He points out that Samantha stood up for herself, that she claimed her own space and made her own choice, and that is something to respect. Smitty reluctantly agrees that maybe the focus should not be on June at all, but on Samantha's strength in facing her. The aftermath of the meeting changes the household in subtle but powerful ways. Samantha carries herself with a new confidence, no longer weighed down by the silence of unasked questions. Tyrell begins to loosen his grip, recognizing that protecting his sister does not mean controlling her. Smitty, though still wary, starts to let go of the bitterness that has long chained him to the past, and Martin, steady as ever, continues to guide them toward unity rather than division, reminding them that family is built not by perfection but by persistence. What remains uncertain is June herself. She has taken a step toward honesty, but whether she can sustain it is unknown. Samantha wonders if their paths will cross again, if the fragile connection will grow or collapse. Tyrell dreads the possibility but also knows that if it happens, he must find a way to face it without letting old wounds consume him. Smitty remains guarded, ready to step in if June falters, but less certain that keeping her away forever is the answer. Samantha has found her voice, Tyrell has confronted his fear, Martin has reinforced his quiet wisdom, and Smitty has begun to soften his grip on anger. June lingers at the edge, neither redeemed nor condemned, a reminder that the past can never be erased but can be faced. And in this fragile balance, the family learns that moving forward does not mean forgetting but choosing how to live with what has been. The days that follow carry a fragile quiet, as if everyone is waiting to see whether the storm has passed or whether another will gather on the horizon. Samantha feels different, steadier, her voice firmer when she speaks, her shoulders no longer bent under the weight of questions left unanswered. The meeting with June did not heal everything it could not, but it gave her a piece of the puzzle she had long been missing. She no longer feels like an outsider to her own body, and though her heart still aches with old wounds, she knows now that she can face them without crumbling. Tyrell watches her closely, torn between relief and unease. He sees her newfound confidence, but he also feels the tug of fear that June's presence could grow into something more dangerous. He does not want to admit it, but he is proud of his sister's strength. In the privacy of his thoughts, he concedes that perhaps she was right, there are things she needs that he cannot provide, and part of loving her is stepping aside. Yet the protective instinct runs deep, and he cannot silence the voice that warns him to stay alert. Smitty is slower to adjust. He keeps his guard high, convinced that June's sudden willingness to help may not last. To him, one honest conversation does not undo years of neglect. But Martin urges him to look deeper, to recognize that the change worth celebrating is not in June but in Samantha. Martin reminds him that control is not love, and that sometimes letting the children navigate their own paths, even risky ones, is the greatest act of care. Gradually, Smitty begins to shift, his anger no longer burning as hot, though it still smolders quietly in the background. June herself becomes a ghostly presence in their days, not living under their roof but lingering in their thoughts. Samantha wonders if she will call again, if they might build something fragile but real. Tyrell hopes she will vanish once more, fearing any attempt at closeness will reopen scars. Smitty stays wary, prepared to intervene. Martin remains calm, urging patience, insisting that whatever happens, they must face it together rather than tearing each other apart. The ending comes not with dramatic fireworks but with small choices that reveal who they have become. Samantha chooses to speak openly, to demand space when she needs it, to claim her independence without severing her ties to the family that raised her. Tyrell chooses to trust her more, even if it means living with unease, understanding that his sister's strength cannot grow under the weight of his constant protection. Smitty chooses, reluctantly, to soften, to allow love to guide him more than anger, to see that his role is not to wall off the past but to support the future. And Martin, steady as always, remains the quiet center, reminding them through actions rather than words that family is not about erasing pain but about surviving it together. In the final moments, Samantha reflects on the journey. She knows June will never be the perfect mother she once dreamed of. She knows the scars of abandonment will always live inside her and Tyrell. But she also knows she is no longer defined solely by what was taken from her. She has the power to choose, to seek answers, to decide what role June will or will not play in her life. For the first time, she feels not like a child waiting for someone else to decide her fate but like a young woman stepping into her own story. Tyrell, though still guarded, finds peace in the realization that his bond with Samantha is unshakable. No matter what June does or does not do, they have already survived the worst together. Their closeness is not a fragile thread but a rope woven through hardship, strong enough to hold them both. He may not be ready to forgive their mother, but he no longer feels he must fight his sister to keep her safe. Smitty and Martin sit together one evening, watching the two siblings laugh in the kitchen. Smitty admits, grudgingly, that perhaps Martin was right, that trying to shield them from everything was never the answer. Martin smiles, not triumphant but grateful, knowing that this acknowledgement means they are finally healing as a family. He tells Smitty that their job is not to erase the children's pain but to walk beside them as they grow stronger.